All right, we're on Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph 21a. After a little Hanukkah break. So we're still in the middle of our discussion about the merit that the Sotah woman might have, which would defer her demise. So this is assuming she's guilty, and thus drinking the water will have its negative impact. But considering her merit, this punishment, this demise, this consequence will be suspended for X amount of time. A year, 2 years, 3 years, or months, depending on the different versions and opinions we mentioned in the Mishnah and in the Braita. So this discussion began by suggesting perhaps, or presumably, her merit is the merit of Torah study. And the Gemoro rejected that by saying she's not commanded in Torah study. It's not her lane, as we explained. But so therefore the Mishnah went on to say, therefore the Gemoro suggested the merit must be the merit of some mitzvah. And that got us into the discussion over this fact that mitzvah seems not to have the same long-lasting effect as Torah. And this is what we discussed at length here, based on Tanya, in the difference between Torah and mitzvahs, in that Torah and mitzvahs are both an engagement with the divine. It's God's Torah, it's God's mitzvah, but the engagement in the relationship is different. With a mitzvah, a Jew is invested in the mitzvah, and thus he is enclosed by the divine energy, or he's surrounded by the divine energy. The divine energy engulfs him. Actually, today's Tanya, we learn the end of chapter 4, and tomorrow we'll learn chapter 5. So the chapters of Tanya that we're studying in this last few days, in the next coming days, in our daily Tanya study, actually is the discussion we're talking about in chapter 4 and 5. And there the Alter Rebbe compares it. In today's Tanya, the Alter Rebbe compares mitzvah to a hug with God. Mitzvah, because you're engaged in it, and the act envelops you, and therefore the divine energy envelops you. The downside is you walk away and the energy only has a residue, but you don't carry it with you. When it comes to Torah, on the other hand, it's divine energy and divine ideas invested inside of me. I'm engaged in it when I learn, and I absorb it. It goes inside of me, especially if I learn with deep concentration, understanding, to the point that the ideas I learn come part of the way I think, like food, right? Mitzvahs like clothing, I put them on, I take them off. Food, I ingest, and it becomes part of who I am. So with Torah, that's food. So with Torah, I ingest divine ideas and energy, and that becomes part of me. And therefore the effect is much longer lasting. We discussed the various subtleties of that on the various degrees and various levels and various opinions as to how long the effect acts, what kind of effect, protection versus saving from the evil inclination, and so on. That's what we discussed last at length. And we suggested that it would depend on the Torah study, and if it's done with the understanding that this is God's Torah, or is this pursuit of the self, and I'm using Torah in pursuit of my own grandeur, my own greatness, and that might be the difference. Torah remains Torah, and therefore the connection with God is forged either way, but I can corrupt that connection if I have a selfish intention, and that might have its effect as well. That was the last thing we discussed in trying to understand where Doeg and Echetofel went wrong. This was our suggested reading. So this is where we are. So the line begins with the word Migana, Atzule Loi Matzla. And the fifth word is Ravina. It's about a third from the bottom of the page. On 21a, Chaf Aleph Mod Aleph. Fifth word is Ravina Amar. See it? Yeah. Okay. So we're back to square one, which is, what is the merit that protects this woman, at least temporarily? We're stuck with the conundrum. On the one hand, she's not obliged in Torah study, and therefore that cannot be the merit. And on the other hand, mitzvah, which she is obligated in many mitzvahs, doesn't seem to have the same long-lasting effect. So what is it that defends, that protects her then? What's the merit that can protect her?
Is this the suspension of her punishment?
The suspension of the Sotah woman's punishment, assuming she's guilty.
What is, right, since
If she was
mitzvahs don't
innocent, she
have
would get
that
blessing.
long-lasting effect. And
That's
it
right.
must be Torah, but we said Torah is not her.
That's right. So mitzvahs don't have that long-lasting effect to be able to protect her some years later, or whatever, however long later. On the Torah, on the other hand, which does have that long-lasting effect, it seems though she's not obligated in Torah. So says Ravina. Ravina says, La'olam, rather we must say, really, Zchus Torah. She has the merit of Torah. That's the merit she has. Now, Udika Amris. And as to the fact that you challenge this by saying, Eina mitzvah va'isa, she is not obliged and commanded. And because she's not commanded in the study of Torah, her study of Torah doesn't have that same effect. So says Ravina, no, but there's another way she can get the merit of Torah. This is a very, very powerful lesson here. Nehi, granted, tepukudi, loy, nefakta. Indeed, she was not commanded. She was not commanded. But beigra, in reward for the fact, the makrin that umasnin benayun, she teaches her sons. Makrin means to read scripture. Umasnin, and to learn Mishnah, to learn the oral Torah. Some reward for teaching her son Torah and the oral Torah, written Torah and the oral Torah. And additionally, benatrin lahu legivrayu, and she waits for her husband. The asme be midrasha, for when he's going to come back from the house of study. So for the merit of educating her children in the ways of Torah, in the study of Torah, and the fact that she enables her husband to study Torah, milay palgan bahadayu, does she not split the reward with them? Now Rashi comments and says, waiting for her husband to come home. Where is Rashi? Yeah, it's in the bottom here. So when it comes to teaching her sons how to learn, it's not necessarily that she herself does so, but that she goes through the stresses of taking her kids to school, making sure they have good teachers, and allowing for her husband and waiting for her husband to come home doesn't just mean to come home in the evening, but actually allowing her husband to leave town, to go take off whatever it is, a month, 2 months, however long it is, to go study Torah in some other city. Like Rabbi Kiva, that was quite an example for 20 years, 28 years, decades. But I would still say, even though that's Rashi's comment in saying that waiting for the husband means he goes to a different town, I would argue that the same thing is true even in the evening. No, I guess I should say this publicly. Why not? I mean, my wife takes my children to school in the morning. That allows me to be here in the morning. And she takes care of the children in the evening, allows me to be here at Kollel at night. So I hope my learning does justice to give her at least her reward. Right? I hope so. Yeah. But yeah, I believe the modern version of that is this idea that husband and a wife enabling her husband and investing the time and energy to make sure children can grow up to be learned in Torah, so she gets the reward. There's a few comments I want to make about this, but you want to say something?
Just a brief comment. Just to beg the question, if a woman is so inclined to have this nature within her to do these sort of things, and how is she able to position herself to be a Sotah candidate in the first place?
Yeah. Okay, so that was the third comment I wanted to make, but that's since you brought it up, I'll make that first. It's a fantastic point, which is you're talking about a woman who goes through all the stresses of making sure children go to school, and she's dealing with the parent, with the teachers, and making sure the kids learning, and calling the teachers calling the parents, and Well, the kid did this, the kid did that, and every morning she's packing lunches and schlepping and going and coming, especially here in Montreal in winter. It's not an easy it's not an easy job. And she's sitting around waiting for her husband to come back from Torah study, and she's all encouraging and smiles and everything else. And she's a Sotah woman who is guilty, not just she's innocent, who is suspected, but she's guilty. And this is the reward. This is right. So that was a comment I was actually thinking as I'm learning this, which gets back to something we discussed in much earlier class. I don't think we learned about it in Sotah. I think it was an earlier Gemoro we learned it in Sanhedrin, I think, which is this idea that when it comes to desires for intimacy, no one is above it. No one is above it. And people ask me about, like, I just had this conversation with someone over the Shabbos on my trip. A person who works in an environment where there's a lot of women in shared space, and he asked, well, what do I do? So I suggested perhaps the first thing is to be aware that you're capable. If you think, oh, it's never going to happen to me, that's when you lower your guard down, and then innocuous conversations lead to not so innocuous conversations. So the first thing is to be aware of, I'm capable of anything here. And when you're aware that you're capable of anything, then you'll notice when that innocuous conversation isn't so innocuous, right? And perhaps that's not the Gemara's intention here, but it seems that could be taken from this as well. Here's a woman who's really a good wife.
Sure.
She's a fantastic wife, a fantastic mother, taking care of her children, making sure they're studying. They're supportive of her husband's learning and so on.
Yeah.
Right? And yet, if she's not on guard, then she can end up being a guilty Sotah. Yeah. And it's not an indictment of her character so much as an indictment of human nature and the challenges that we face as biological humans. Mm-hmm. That was one of the comments I wanted to make. I was going to make that at the end, but you brought it up, I think it's a valid point. Another thing to say is like this. So on the basic level, there's a message here to what it's like to be a supportive, good Jewish wife, right? And the merit that a woman gets for supporting her husband's learning and her children's learning. So I want to suggest like this. First of all, I don't think it's just, let me rephrase that. When we learn Chassidus, we understand that reward isn't just a compensation. Like you did something nice, we'll pat you on the back, we'll give you a cookie, right? Or I'm being a little facetious, but even money. What's the relationship between the work you did and money? Nothing. Money is just a store of value to indicate that what you produce was valuable. We'll give you money. But money has nothing to do with painting walls or fixing shoes or whatever it is else you do for a living. It's compensation. There's no real relationship between money and your work other than money represents the value you've earned by that work, right? It's compensation. Same thing is true with a lot of punishments. Kid misbehaves, so the kid loses out on a candy. What's the relationship between candy and misbehavior? Zero. No relationship between misbehaving and candy. Just you did something. Yeah, you could. It's an incentive. It's an incentive thing. You didn't incentive or compensation. You misbehaved. You did something you weren't supposed to. So we're gonna take away something you want. Well, what's the connection? Zero. Right? It's compensation. That's one way of looking at reward and punishment. But Chassidus teaches us to look at reward and punishment as a consequence or net result. So there's a direct correlation between reward and punishment, because between reward and action, in that the action created the reward. If you could use the example of painting walls, so you can get paid money for painting walls, no relationship between the wall and money, or you can paint the wall in your own house, and what's the reward? Well, now you have a freshly painted house. So the act itself is the reward. The appreciation of what you've done itself is the reward. So when it comes to reward in Torah, the way Chassidus teaches us to understand is to think about it in the latter way, in that the reward itself is produced by the work you've done. So if the reward for serving God is to appreciate and enjoy a relationship with God, whether it's soul after the soul leaves the body, whether it's the soul in the times of Mashiach, or whether a person gets a glimpse of that feeling in this life while he's living here. The reward is the net result of what he's done. It's the relationship he built with God. That appreciation, that's the reward, to enjoy that relationship. That's what Garden of Eden is. What's Gan Eden? What's Gan Eden? Heaven. Heaven is to experience all the relationships I've made with God within this world. And hell is to appreciate all the disconnect I've done in my sin. That's what hell is, whether in this world or the next. Right? That's what's a cleansing. Person goes through what it means to feel like what he's done, that cleanses him of that behavior. Like a good therapy. Person goes and works through all the negativity, that's how they heal. By feeling the pain of that negativity. By working through that pain of that negativity. So if that's the case, then when a woman supports her husband and her children in learning, it's not really compensation. She gets half the reward. It's not really compensation. But because she created her husband's learning, she's part of it. Right? Not just that, compensation for putting up with it, she gets rewarded. But the relationship her husband builds with God through this Torah study, and her children learn with God through Torah study, she is part of that relationship with God, considering that she was part of creating that. Which leads to my next point, which is there's a message to the husbands here. If your wife is investing in your wife is investing in your relationship with God by enabling you to study, and that's how she builds a relationship. She's building a relationship with God by supporting yours. Then the burden is on us to make sure we're producing. If we're not going out of town to learn, but we're taking off the evening to learn, and our wives are staying at home, they're waiting for us, or whatever she's doing. And then we spend half our time chatting and whatnot. And what's going on here? Here, our wife is putting up with us and smiling and investing in that relationship with God, and we're squandering it on chit chat with the boys. That's not fair. That's not fair. Moreover, I would argue that you want to do this right. When you come home, share something you learned. Share something you learned. Let her be part of it. The Gemoro is telling us here that she owns half of it because she's part of half of it. So then share it with her, right? Your wife lets you stay up all night at a farbrengen. The next morning, be a better husband because of it. She invested in you going to that farbrengen and being able to enjoy and appreciate, connection with Hashem. Then share that with her. Share a story you heard. Share something you heard. Share a smile. Bring back the aura of what you've done. My wife's great, I think it's 4 greats, grandfather. His name was, he's a well-known character in Chabad, and he's the father of a very large Chabad family, who, with the blessing of one of the Rebbes, all survived Russia. Most Chabad families came back with, losing most of their family to communist Russia, either being killed or just being swayed by the secularist, communist, socialist idea. But this family, with the blessing of the 5th Chabad Rebbe, they all survived and they all came to America. So it's a massive Chabad family. So his name is Chaim Ben Sion. What's his name? And him and his wife were both very well known for dedication to educating their children. And all their children remained true to Judaism, to the Hasidic way of life. And they submitted to their children and their children and their children, down to my father-in-law and all of his many cousins. So this Chaim Ben Sion would daven for many hours on Shabbos. Many hours he would sit and pray and daven. She would come home late. And of course, his wife is home with the children, and they're cranky and they're jumping and they're waiting for the father to come home for Kiddush. And her children repeated that she would always say to her children, she would always tell her children, we encouraged Tati to go daven, because when he comes home, he brings with him the smell of Gan Eden. And this is the message that children grew up with, that comes home late Shabbos afternoon, and he brings with him the smell of Gan Eden. You can only get away with that if you're actually bringing home the smell of Gan Eden. You can't go chit chat with the boys all Shabbos morning and I don't know, whatever other activities a person does in a shul. And then, oh yeah, my wife is so supportive of my ways, and you come home and no,
Yeah.
if you're gonna take advantage of a supportive, if you're taking this advantage of a supportive wife who's allowing you to go and indulge in your learning and your spiritual activity, then you got the responsibility to do your half of the deal.
Yeah.
Do your half of the deal. Anyway, so there's a lot more to think about it, but
that may also be in line with what we learned earlier about when some of the woman was found guilty, that ultimately it wasn't entirely her fault.
that's right.
It was, if you look back, the layers.
That's right.
Like the genesis of it was probably
That's right.
started with.
We learned this
her
way at the big.
husband.
That's right. We learned this one of the first pages inside one of the first classes we learned.
Yeah,
That if a guy is suspecting his wife, he should look in the mirror.
yeah.
So
And
here
he
it comes
may
full
have
circle.
been the whole reason
So here it
the
comes
whole
full circle.
thing happened.
That's right. If she's sharing half of his reward, then his behavior reflects in her.
Women tend to lash out as a consequence of.
No, people in general do, right?
Yeah.
If in relationships, if the guy's taking advantage of her nicety and not doing it, that's right. If he's taking advantage of her support, but not delivering, then he might end up with a like the wife. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it is. This doesn't abscond her of her guilt,
No.
which is why she'll has her consequence. But as we learned also, if he's guilty, he also gets his consequence as well.
Right.
So that's right. Here we learn the depth of the partnership, not just partnership in just a physical sense, but it's partnership in a spiritual sense.
Yeah, it's bilateral.
It goes both. That's right. It goes both ways. And the last thing is perhaps because she's the one that gets half the reward for his going away and learning, I mean, she owns half of it, which means if she says no, stay home.
Yeah.
Maybe that's also what this means. And if she's saying no, then perhaps it's on you to demonstrate that you going to learn is not just going to give her, reward, but reward in the sense that the consequence of your going away learning will be that our relationship is deeper. Right? If you come home with that aura of Gan Eden, you come home with a smile and with beautiful messages that you've learned, then maybe she will want to partner with you because she sees there's something worthy here.
Yeah.
Right?
She'll probably intuitively know if her husband is sincere in his
That's right. That's what
intent to learn.
exactly.
If he is, then she'll intuitively pick that up.
That's right. That's why
and concede to it.
that's why this Hasidic woman said, "The smell of Gan Eden."
Yeah, the smell
It's
is
the,
the
there's,
intuition.
that's right. There's an intuitive sense that there's a Gan Eden coming here. That's right. There's a Gan
Sincere.
Eden coming with this husband. It's not the.
She'll
Right.
know if it's not.
She'll know if it's sincere or not. By the way you walk, by the way you talk, by the way you talk to her and share with her, and so on. I just can close with this that the Neviv was in 70 70 78 77 when Deborah had the heart attack publicly in Simchas Torah, the famous story. They had a heart attack in the middle of the Hakafis with all the surrounding events. So at one point, one of the doctors asked Deborah for his daily schedule. They wanted to encourage Deborah to do exercise, which Deborah did. Deborah walked up. They closed off a certain hallway.
Daily routine is probably
Very grueling.
difficult.
Very grueling. Deborah didn't sleep very much. Deborah didn't eat very much. But they wanted Deborah to exercise, which Deborah did. For a certain period, they would close a certain hallway in 770, and Deborah would walk up and down the hallway. That's his exercise. Anyway, so they asked Deborah for his routine, and Deborah told the doctor that sworn to secrecy. I can't tell anybody what my daily routine is. And Deborah told the doctor what his daily routine is. The doctor said, I'm guessing he was granted permission to repeat this. He repeated and said that one thing I can tell you about Deborah's schedule is that he spends every day a half an hour talking with his wife, and to him, that's as important as putting on tefillin every day. And you can bet everything you have, Deborah's schedule is more packed than yours and mine combined. But that half an hour, like your schedule could be busy. You're not missing tefillin. You're davening shachas and putting on tefillin. It's just the way life is, right? No matter how schooling your schedule is. So imagine that was in the schedule every day, half an hour with no phone, with no nothing, you're talking to your wife. That kind of relationship is where there's a partnership, and everything that the husband does, the wife shares half of that. It's quite a powerful lesson for both husband and wife. Okay, so more on this, God willing. We actually get back to something we talked about earlier. Tomorrow, right? We mentioned in the past there was the candlelight, there was the light of the sun, and then there was the fork in the road.
Yeah.
Right. So we suggested that the fork in the road meant prayer, davening. Gemoro is going to discuss the details of that, and we'll see how that plays into what we've been talking about over the last few weeks. Okay, wonderful day, everybody.